Okay, we want to thank everybody for coming to today's Public Library Oral History. Today we have Ralph Germain and his sister Ella Germain. They were raised on a farm northwestern of Richmond, between Somerset and Richmond. They have a lot of interesting stories to tell you. Ralph grew up here and then he moved to Sage, worked at 3M, was in the service. He said he wasn't around some, but I remember in high school and my younger days, I saw him a lot around this town. Sister Ella has been a nun and is back living in Somerset now.
Spend more time in Europe.
Go ahead, Ralph.
Okay. Well, you're probably why I'm wearing something like this. I never wore anything like this around Somerset, but I'm going further back. Before I talk about Somerset, I want to talk about the French Canadians who might have been involved in the fur trade, some of our relatives possibly. In fact, there's someone in the audience today who said she had a relative in the fur trade. So I'm going to talk about Somerset. The fur trade flourished for about 200 years, from about 1650 to 1850. And it was driven by the demand for beaver fur hats, which were very fashionable in Europe. And the 36-foot long Montreal canoe were loaded with 90-pound packs of trade goods, consisting of pots, pans, kettles, gunpowder, shot, wine, knives, traps, and so forth, to trade for furs with the Indians. They departed from the Lachine Rapids below Montreal in the spring, so they would arrive at Grand Portage in Minnesota the first part of July. And there were a lot of portages in these routes, and a couple of them I'm going to mention are the longest one was right there at Grand Portage to get on the river now, the Pigeon River, and there was a 9-mile portage. Can you imagine emptying all those 90-pound packs and carrying them 9 miles and carrying the canoe 9 miles? That's part of the hard work that they had to do. And another one is in Wisconsin, up there at the mouth of the Brule River. There's a 3-mile portage going into Lake St. Croix at Solon Springs. And when I was, my children were young, I walked that portage. It was marked and you could walk it. And it's a shame that they haven't kept it. It's not marked anymore. You can't hardly find the trail. But it was very interesting. There were a lot of markings with French Canadian names along that trail. So that was very interesting going through that portage. And then meeting there in Grand Portage from the west were les hivernants, which was the word for the winterers, who wintered at various small fur trading forts in the north central states and Canada. An example of a couple of them that are close to here would be Fort Follavoine in Webster, Wisconsin, has been rebuilt, and also the Northwest Company Fur Trading Post at Pine City, Minnesota. They're very interesting to visit. They brought furs there in Grand Portage that they had acquired during the winter by trading with the Indians, and also trapping some themselves. They used the North Canoe, about 26 feet long. Many of those hired to paddle the canoes were French Canadians, especially with the Northwest Fur Company. A premium was paid for a song leader because by paddling the beat of the songs, they would paddle in unison. And at this time I can give you an example of one of those fur trading songs. Quand au port des Chanquiers, mes chers amis, tout le cœur gai, pour aller voir tous nos parents, mes chers amis, le cœur content. Envoyons de l'avant nos gens, envoyons de l'avant, envoyons de l'avant nos gens, envoyons de l'avant. Pour aller voir tous nos parents, mes chers amis, le cœur content. Mais quand on arrive au Canada, il va falloir y mouiller ça. Envoyons de l'avant nos gens. Envoyons de l'avant, envoyons de l'avant nos gens, envoyons de l'avant. I neglected to tell you that en voyant de l'avant means, let's go ahead, men. They were paddling their canoe. And distances were measured by how many pipes they smoked. Apparently they didn't have watches in the early part of the fur trade. They measured their distances by how many of these clay pipes they smoked. So if they went paddle for a day, someone would ask them how long we go. Oh, we went 5 pipes today. That was the way they did it. And then when the fur trade was over, well, they thought of new things to do and new places to go. With the end of the fur trade, many French Canadians were unemployed and began to seek work elsewhere. The first 2 settlers who arrived near the confluence of the St. Croix and Apple rivers were 2 brothers, Joseph and Louis Parent, who had heard about the opportunity to work lumbering or at sawmills in the area and the chance of acquiring land from the federal government. The year was 1850. Potatoes grew well in the area, and so they called the area La Pointe de la Pomme de Terre. Pomme de terre literally means apple, and La Pointe de la Pomme de Terre means the junction of the Apple and the St. Croix rivers. The Parent brothers sent word to their brothers and neighbors in the La Baie du Faible in Canada to come to Wisconsin. That's the way they pronounce Wisconsin. From 1851 to 1852, many of them did come to the area. My great-grandfather, who was 45 years old, his name was Zephirin, and he came in 1855 with his wife, Joseph, and 8 children ranging in age from 15 to less than 1 year old. Can you imagine traveling 1,000 miles without a car with children that young? It must have been a real dangerous trip. Our first generation ancestor was from France, and his name was Ella Germain. He was baptized in 1639 in Normandy, France, and married Marie Poignard of France at Quebec City, Canada in October of 1669. At first, priests from St. Paul, Hudson, and Stillwater ministered to the pioneers in their homes and often stayed with them. The first church was built in 1856 at the confluence of the St. Croix and Apple rivers. It also had a cemetery. Both church and cemetery were moved to a new church in 1875 to the village, founded by Samuel Harriman in 1856 and named it Somerset after Somerset County, Maine, and Somerset County, England, where his father was from. 3 of the most notable priests to serve the Somerset area was Father Joseph Groifon from 1866 to 1868. Now there was a story about this priest who had a journey from St. Paul to Pembina, North Dakota, and he got caught in a blizzard, a real bad blizzard. To save his life, he had to cut the horse open, cut it out, crawl inside of it so he wouldn't freeze to death. And he ended up having a leg amputated from frostbite, but he lived. And I met his great nephew in St. Paul once, and he wrote a book about Father Groifon and all about his areas that he served and about these tough times he had in those days. And that book is available, I guess, at the Washington County Library in Stillwater. Maybe I'm mistaken, but if not there, it's available at the Washington County, at the Historical Society, which is along the Main Street, the north end of Main Street, near at the warden's house. And let's see, after him was Father Baudet for about 25 years. John Rivard, about 24 years. And the fine parochial school was built during his ministry. Now I want to talk a little bit about courting. You know, in those days there weren't too many women around. Where are they going to find a wife when they moved over here? Well, my great uncle, David Germain, he had first applied. He was the first French Canadian in the area to apply in Hudson for a homestead. So he had acquired this homestead north of Somerset, cleared a few acres, and was ready for a wife and family. There were no girls of marriageable age in the small Apple River settlement, and he preferred a French-Canadian girl so he could speak with her the same language. But he had heard of several French-Canadian families in Petit Canada, which is Little Canada, north of St. Paul. So he traveled there by boat and foot, and soon learned of a family where 5 young ladies were waiting for the right one. So David entered the house, and after introductions, he obtained permission of the father to make his pitch. So he made his presentation of his fine qualities, complete with facts and figures on his grand estate. 40 acres is nothing but woods by the Apple River. Not too far from his parents. Then the crucial moment came, and David pulled a tour de force that took the girls by a very pleasant surprise. He took a $20 gold piece out of his pocket. That was a lot of money in those days. He threw it on the floor and said, "You are all beautiful. She who wishes to become my wife can pick up the gold piece and keep it as my first gift to her." Oh, they glanced around at each other and their parents. The father nodded approval, and the mother giggled at the whole thing. After a few moments of silence, Anne came forward with determination and decision and picked up the gold piece. Arrangements were made with the priest, and the rest is history. They had 10 children, 9 girls, and 1 boy who died when he was very young. Her name was Anne Rivard. Before my dad, John D., married, he worked at logging in Stillwater, building the dam just above the river's edge, and was hired in St. Paul as a streetcar operator. He was held up at gunpoint and decided to quit. He married Béranger de l'Aventure. Most of you in English would call that Béranger l'Aventure. September 20th, 1910. He worked as a bartender for a short time in what is now the Sportsman here. The priest at St. Anne's let him know that that was not a good place to work, and he recommended that he try farming. So he purchased a farm about 2 miles west of New Richmond and 3/4 of a mile north of Highway 64. That farm was 240 acres, very hilly and rocky. During World War II, he purchased about 160 acres more in Stanton Township. I recall my dad milking about 30 cows by hand until about 1941 or 1942, when we finally got a milking machine. And some of the things he raised on that farm were hogs, chickens, turkeys, and we had a water tank system in the barn for watering the cattle, and one upstairs in the bedroom for supplying water to the kitchen. Well, that worked fine in the summertime, but in the winter, the overhead pipe going to the upstairs in the house would freeze. So what my dad would do, he'd take a gunny sack and roll it in a little ball, wrapped wire on it, around it, and tied it on a long piece of pipe. and poured kerosene on it, lighted it up, and that was the torch that he unfroze the water pipes with. He had to do that a lot every winter. And we finally got electricity in 1945. Before that, we had a small wind generator above our garage that supplied electricity for a radio and 2 lamps in the house. Dad grew mostly oats, corn, but at times also grew rye, wheat, barley, and sorghum. I don't even know what sorghum is. Sweet corn and soybeans. All farm work was done with horses till 1942, when we finally got a tractor. And of course, my dad was born in 1887, so I imagine he rode a lot of horses in his days. So he bought us ponies. Us kids always rode ponies. And some of the other entertainment on the farm, we had a very hilly farm, so we did a lot of skiing. And my relatives from Richmond would come with their friends. There would be a dozen people skiing on our property. And he also had a large garden. Raised all kinds of potatoes, filled the whole room in the cellar. Had potatoes for all winter. And then, let's see, I want to talk a little bit about a walkathon that was held at the terrace here in Somerset. It was before my time. I was very small. But I was told that my brother was in it, Andy, and that he won first prize in it. It's one of those contests where you walk and walk and walk. They said they never slept, but they sneaked it somehow. They cheated. And when I'd go to funerals, after church, the ladies of St. Anne would be marching to the cemetery, and they'd be saying, "Je vous salue Marie, pleine de grâce, le Seigneur est avec vous." You knew they were praying in French, they were saying the Hail Mary. And then after Mass, we'd have catechism classes. So the parents after church would go downtown and wait for us, and we'd walk down there afterwards, after catechism class. Usually my dad would get into a card game. And I'd come down there and I would hear them, men playing cards, they would say, 15-2, 15-4, 15-6, and péri-rip. You knew they were playing cribbage. They were saying 15-2, 15-4, 15-6, and a pair of 8. My parents sang mostly in French at family gatherings. Mother rocked many of us to sleep singing to us in French. One of those songs I still recall is Souvenir d'un vieillard, which means remembrance of an elderly person. And at this time, I would like to do it for you. Petits enfants, jouez dans la prairie, chantez, chantez le doux parfum des fleurs, profitez bien du printemps de la vie. Trop tôt est là, vous verserez des pleurs. Dernier amour de ma vieillesse, venez à moi, petits enfants, de vous une caresse pour oublier mes cheveux blancs. A little bit about myself. I was in the Cold War from November of '54 to August of '56. I served in Germany, Bamberg and Stuttgart, Germany. For a hobby, I flew airplanes for about 20 years, earned a commercial license in 1972. I retired from 3M Company in November of '94. Married Diane Heller from Shakopee, Minnesota. And we had 3 children, Tony, 35, Simone's 31, and Sarah, 28. And that's all I have to say. Now my sister.
Well, my aim is to tell you a little bit about the life that I led here in Richmond. I was away so much that I came back now and I realize how many people I do not know. Anyway, I would like to give you a little bit about the French influence and how it had a reflection of the times that we were living in. So Ralph already told you about the pioneers. Our family, Deschambault was the town that our people came from. It was along the upper St. Lawrence River. And I had the joy not too long ago to visit the place. I went to Montreal and Quebec with a lady that I taught French to. So we had a car. And as we were going along, I saw Deschambault on the sign. So I told her, can we stop here and see this place? Maybe some of our relatives might be here. So she said, oh, we'll do that when we come back. So sure enough, we stopped, and this lady said, what brings you here? She said that in French, of course. And I told her that I was a Germain. Oh, she got all excited. She was a Germain too, and she said, oh, come on in. Oh. So we went in the house. She showed us royally, you know. And then her husband said, would you like to go and see my great uncle? Yeah, great uncle, I guess. But anyway, I said, sure. So he took us there. And when we got in, I saw this old man sitting in a rocker. And he had blue eyes, and he had a nose just like my dad, and his name was John. So I thought of my dad, you know. Anyway, he said a long time ago, there were some of our relatives here who left Deschambault, and they went to a little town in Wisconsin. Well, those were people that we knew about that had come. Our great uncles and so on. But anyway, it's kind of a coincidence. And then the other side of the family, the Laventures, because my dad married a Laventure, L'Aventure, like you said. They were from the lower St. Lawrence River. And the name of the town was Lanoraie. And that family was a builder of boats for the St. Lawrence River. And one day, the train, they opened up the bridge, whatever, and the train was coming. And it received the wrong signals. And below was the boat, the Laventure boat, filled with passengers. And with the wrong signals, the train went down over the boat. So hundreds of people were killed and injured. So then the Laventures decided to leave the town and come to Wisconsin. So that's how they came. And then the Germains and the Laventures got together somehow. My dad married Branger, like you said. So that's how the Laventures came. And the Germains came because the British people would not allow the French to have much property. And it was very, very hard to raise a family with only a few acres of land. So they decided to come. So both of them were under pressure, really, when they came. Now, you already talked, I'll talk about the dairy farm that we had. We milked about over 30 cows, 32, I guess. and milking by hand. When I was there, we never had a milking machine. And the milking time, in a way, was kind of a fun time for us kids, you know. Andy, my brother, enjoyed squirting milk at me. And of course, I would put the pail down and run after him and catch up with him and give him a few pounds. Anyway, my brother Delore, as he would milk, he would hum some tunes, and they were always kind of a slow tune. So what happened is that it took him a long time to milk this cow. And then it was kind of interesting too. We would bring our cup to the barn and have nice frothy hot milk to drink right from the cow. It wasn't cold, it was hot. We liked it. One time when I was about 8 years old, my dad was coming from the fields, and he said, "Ella, do you want to milk one more cow? We're kind of late tonight." Well, I had not milked any cow except this one that I was used to. So I must have done something wrong. She kicked me and sent me across the gutter. Broke my nose, all kinds of gashes here. Well, anyway, they took me to the doctor for that. And the next day, my dad sold the cow. French was spoken at home all the time. First day at school, I remember sitting on the teacher's lap in the first grade and crying because I couldn't understand anything. They were all speaking English. Well, anyway, it didn't take too long that I learned English. My mother and dad both wanted us to speak French in the house so the younger ones in the family would learn it. Outside, we could speak English, so it didn't take very long that we became bilingual, both languages. Our prayers were always said in French. My mother and dad and all of the children kneeling down, and we said the Our Father in French, the Hail Mary, and I believe in God. Okay. And after that, my mother and dad would say in French, the commandments of God, the whole 10. And then they would say the acts of faith, hope, and charity, all in French. And then the examination of conscience, well, we all did that. But anyway, and then we had the rosary besides. So we would go from one knee to the other, you know. Anyway, we said our prayers in French. At St. Anne's Church, everything was in French. Father Baudet said the sermon in French. And after he said it in French, he said it the same sermon in English after a while. But in the beginning, it was all French. So that took a little while.
Had to go to confession in French too.
Confession in French. The choir sang French hymns. The liturgy was in Latin. Confessions in French. Many years I still went to confession in French. When I went to France to study, I didn't have to learn that part. I knew that. Anyway, my years at home until 1932, when I entered the convent, well, during that time when I was home, everything was a little different than it is now. We had an outdoor toilet. We had a catalog from Sears Roebuck for toilet tissue. We had kerosene lamps. And my dad was very fussy about the lamps. We had to have them nice, shiny, because, you know, when you have a kerosene lamp, they get kind of dark from the smoke. So he wanted us to clean those kerosene lamps every day. if necessary. When we ironed, we had to put the iron on the stove to heat it. There was no electricity. No radios. In 1928, Al Smith was running to be president. He was the first Catholic to run for president. We wanted to hear that, but we had no radio, no TV. So what did we do? We all got in the car and we went to Francis Broll, and they had a radio, so we listened to the returns at Francis Broll's. It's better than nothing. We had a phone that you would ring like this, you know, and we had two short and one long. That was our telephone. But it was a party line, so sometimes there was people on the line, so you had to wait quite a while sometimes. We had no car until we got the old Ford. Before that, we used a horse and buggy. But we found ways to have fun. Dad used, in the wintertime especially, Dad would do gymnastics, and we always admired the tricks that he could do. We could not imitate him very well, but he was really good at that. We played cards only after the homework was done. So we all were around the table in silence doing our homework so that we could play cards with Dad.
What kind of card? Old maids, wasn't it?
Oh, we had the old maid cards, and we had, I don't know what they called it in French.
Cookie.
Cookie? Yeah. Anyway, another thing that we did was to go to the Harry Brown show in Richmond. It was a tent show. I don't know if you remember that or not, but one time when we were there, Leo Carafel and Ella Carafel, they were friends of ours, had their car there, and it got stolen somehow during the show. So we took them home. But those things happened then as they do now. In the barn, we had a big swing that, I don't know how to explain this really, but on one side of the barn upstairs, there was a kind of a little elevation, a little platform there, and on this side there was another elevation. And then there was a rope that we would get, I don't know how, but we would go from one to the other across the whole barn. And of course that was a treat. Softball, we had our own team. We enough to have our own team. 4th of July was kind of fun. We had parades, fun time, you know, and Dad always took us along, and he gave us each 25 cents. And he said, if you need more, come and ask me. So we did that. And then you talked about the winter sports already.
Well, I didn't mention the wintertime, Dad would hitch up the horses on a sleigh. And we'd go and visit the neighbors, usually Herman Dulon. And
Fred.
and we would hook a toboggan or skis on a rope behind the sleigh while the sleigh was being pulled, and we thought that was a lot of fun. But anyways, when they got there, they always had a musician, a violin player for the party, and they'd push the tables aside and the chairs, and that living room would be all open, and they'd get that violin player going, and they'd square dance till wee hours of the morning.
I'm glad to know, Ralph, that was my wife.
That was
Dad.
Pauline's dad that played that violin. Also, another one was Fred Germain, my uncle, and Adelphus Leventure, my great uncle. He could play the violin very well without ever taking a lesson.
Okay, young people came from the cities to our farm to ski. Why? Because it was so hilly. One of the hills was awfully, awfully big. And Andrew and Dolores built a ski jump at the bottom of it. And then Andrew went down and just perfect landing. And then he looked up at me up there and he said, I dare you. And of course, I always took a brother's dare. I went down that hill and I didn't fall. I just made that ski jump perfect. And he couldn't believe it, but I did. So we did have fun too. And when we got home, Mother would have a cake, freshly baked, and of course, the cake was gone in no time. How did we celebrate Christmas? In those days, Christmas was, the time of the year, December, was so much colder than it is now. We went to midnight mass in a big sleigh, a team of horses. We had to go 5 miles. It was very, very cold. So my mother would give us some blankets, and she would heat some bricks so we could put that at our feet and cover it up real well. We managed to get to St. Anne's Church. And then, of course, the horses my dad put them in the shed that they had there. You don't know what that is, but there was a long row of overhead, I don't know, platform there, and that sheltered the horses during the Mass. And I suppose you know the fact that, I think it was Father Karen. He used to give long talks for the sermon, very long. And he would tell the altar boys, blow the candles out so we can save some wax. He knew the sermon was going to be long. Anyway, when we got home after the réveillon, reveille, you know, to wake us up. And what did we have? Oysters. That's a French custom. And of course, other goodies with it. Oh, yeah. Before Lent, we made the rounds. All the neighbors and my mother and dad, we all went from one neighbor to the other to sing and dance, like you mentioned. Square dance. My dad was a very, very good square dance caller. He sang the calls, and he had a very nice voice. And like you said, they did that until late, at 3 o'clock in the morning. Cows had to be milked the next morning. They didn't get much sleep before they got to the cows. On Easter, my mother would always manage to sew an outfit for us, so we had something new for Easter. She stayed up long hours to do that. And then we had confessions, and the lines were very long. On Holy Saturday, everybody went to confession. We stood there in line until it was all done. 1917, this is a flashback. It was the year of the flu. My mother and dad got the flu. And then there was myself, Delora and Andrew, and Claire, who were very young. Well, anyways, I don't know how they did this, but Dr. Faneff came to our farm. He was dressed, it was wintertime in December, I think. He was dressed in a very long coat made of fur from the top to the bottom. It was cold. And he gave my mother and dad some medication that was the right thing because they recovered. So many thousands died of the flu that year. In 1932, I entered the convent in Crookston. And in 1933, I took the holy habit, and I took the name of Sister Rita Marie after my sister Rita. And the bishop, well, first of all, my parents, and Andrew and Claire, and Ralph was just a baby, and my mother and dad drove 300 miles to come to see me receive the holy habit. And the bishop entered the church, and he had this mitre and crozier, you know, dressed up in his and walking down the church aisle. And we, myself and those who were receiving the habit, were dressed like brides. We had a white outfit on with a veil and all that. And we were sitting in the front, and there the bishop is walking down the aisle, and I hear a little voice say, "Santa Claus." Santa Claus.
That was Santa Claus.
The bishop was Santa Claus. Oh dear. In 1933, I went to France. Went by boat. Took us 9 days to cross the ocean. In 1934, I made my first vows. And then I spent the summer in the French Alps. There was a vacation place that we had there. And Parisian girls, Paris girls came to this place and for vacation. And in the morning they studied. They had notebooks that you could have framed. They were so perfectly done. So all morning was study. In the afternoon, we went on hikes in the mountains. So one day, we're walking up and around the mountains with these girls, and all of a sudden, I'm all by myself in the little pathway. I don't know where the girls disappeared. I looked around, they were gone. And then I saw in front of me, just a little ways over, a snake. I picked up a few stones, and I threw it at the snake, and I hit it right on the head. And it died right instantly. The girls all came out and said, "Sister, that was lucky you killed it. That was a viper." And a viper jumps and they can, kill you in no time. So I guess I was spared that day. While I was in France, my sister Claire came, because she was a nun also. And she came for her religious studies. I stayed in France 2.5 years, and then it was time to come back. The trip back was much harder than the trip going. We had a really bad hurricane at sea, just terrible. They gave us a life jacket, and they gave us the number of the boat we would take if we had to take it. And all night long, it seemed like the boat was going to go over. I looked out the porthole. It was just, you wondered what. And the waves were bigger than the boat. One lady came to us before we went to our cabins, and she said, "Sisters," and she was praying. She said, "If we get to New York, I promise I will go to confession." I often wondered if she went. We got there safely after all. When I got back home, Leo, my brother Leo, and Dennis, and Ralph, and Rita, they hardly knew me. They didn't know who I was anymore, because I was gone 2.5 years. So I had to play some little games, I remember. What was it called? Drop the hanky or something like that, just to get acquainted again, and pretty soon they gradually remembered. So in 1935, I began my teaching career. I graduated from St. Catherine's with a bachelor's degree in social studies. And I went to the University of Notre Dame, Indiana, for my master's in French. And then I taught grade school in Superior, Wisconsin, Argyle, Minnesota, St. Paul, and Superior, Wisconsin. Most of my teaching years were in Crookston and St. Paul. I was 27 years at Cretan-Dereham High School, where I taught French, Anyway, my whole teaching number of years was about 72 years. I retired in June of 2005. I'm now living in Somerset with my sister Rita. I have a variety of interests. One special one is teaching French every Friday to the different groups at St. Anne's. These little children are my pupils. I also work in the parish directory at St. Anne's because we're having our 150 years, you know, at the church and the town. And then I also have a prayer group. We meet once a month. A knitting group. We knit shawls to give to the elderly, the sick, the needy. And in other words now, I have seen many, many changes in life. Changes in lay clothes when I had to give up the habit that I used to wear for many, many years. And we have all the modern conveniences now that we never had before. Catholic schools in Somerset, the first one was in 1890, and that was by the Sisters of St. Joseph of Concordia in Kansas. And that closed in 19, wasn't open very long. And then the new school began in 1907. It's called the new school, the second school. And it was built a combination day school, boarding school, and convent. It had 3 stories. There were a chapel, 6 classrooms, living area for the sisters. Pauline went to that school, and many others do here. Anyway, the total cost of that school is $18,000. And then Father Karen finished the school. Father Burraby was transferred, so Karen finished the school. It was a big celebration in 1908. And then in 1909, 7 sisters came to teach from Crookston. Some of them were directly from France. And they were to teach French, of course. And there have been 90 sisters that have taught at St. Anne's School, sisters of our order. I have here the actual contract, a duplicate of it, that Father Karen wrote out for the sisters. And it reads something like this. At a meeting of the Board of Trustees of St. Anne's Catholic Congregation of Somerset, Wisconsin, present Reverend Eugene Karen, Vice President, Lawrence Parnell, Secretary, Eli Charlin, I don't know who that is, Treasurer. Also, Sister Martina, CSJ from France, and Mother Valentine, CSJ from France, of the Sisters of St. Joseph, and they were stationed in Argyle, Minnesota. It was agreed by said sisters to take charge of the parish school and said congregation to teach from 1st to 8th grades inclusively, for which work they agreed to furnish at least 4 teaching sisters and 1 lay teacher if necessary, at a salary of $200 for each teaching sister for each term of 10 months. That was not very much, was it? Taking charge is September 1909. The sisters further agreed to teach English and French to the children, and French especially, for Christian doctrine, reading and writing, and also to the boarders as soon as it shall be reasonably possible for conditions to be set forth later. Also to teach 9th and 10th grades when possible, and when they shall be able to furnish more sisters to teach them 4. They agreed to furnish these without additional costs to the congregation. The congregation agrees to furnish the light and the fuel for building for the building and accepts the above agreement by its legal officers, and that was signed by them all. I have to show you, this is kind of a distant, but anyway, this is our great-grandmother, that was Dad's grandma, and she's the one who came with 8 children, and the baby Damas, who was our grandfather, and then the dad of our father. That's her picture. And then, one more thing. I have before me some wonderful little children here. They're my pupils. And they're going to sing for you. They're going to sing a little French song that I taught them. Are you willing?
Yeah.
Okay. That's so wonderful, you gotta sing it once more. Isn't that good? They know another one, but I don't know. Do you want to sing Dans la forêt lointaine? Yeah. Let's try that one.
French saying for all of us, and it was so we thought it was so funny and cute that he'll re-sing it. He would say, "Tu vas monter au ciel avec une brossée de cocombe." Translated, "You're going to go to heaven with an armful of cucumbers." When he first said it, or what? I brought a painting. Well, this year I did this Voyager thing in Hayward for 8 years in a row. Was for the opening ceremonies of Lumberjack Days. This is a 36-foot long Montreal canoe, real birch bark canoe, and I'm on it. You have to find me. And then I brought a painting of our farm, a large color painting of our farm buildings over there on that table, and a few fur trade artifacts over there.
Here's the picture.
Oh. This is our farm. Well, I guess he's going to bring me the artifacts. Can you take this?
Cool boots.
You all recognize this. This is a coonskin cap.
Oh, cool.
You wore that too. These are Indian ceremonial boots. Here's what they used to load their musket loaders. They carried the powder in here. They measure it in this little thing on the end, pour it in down the gun barrel, pack it down, and then an Indian arrowhead.
Oh, yeah, I have one. Oh, cool. It's so cute.
Oh, she wants to.
I have to tell you another little story. When Urban was small, and I mean little, he would, we were on the farm and there were all kinds of buildings and stuff. I couldn't find him. My mother said, "You gotta find Urban." And I would look and I'd say, "Urban, D what?" Half French and half English. Urban say what? So there in the distance, after a while, I would hear, what? You know, we had a windmill that had a pretty big wheel up there at the top. And then we had steps going up to this windmill. Well, one day he disappeared. We couldn't find him again. He was about 3 years old. He had climbed the steps of that windmill way to the top, way to the very top. And he was sitting up there, and we discovered him. And of course, my dad went up one step at a time, and he talked real nice to him, not loud or anything, so he wouldn't scare him, because he could have fallen down. And there we were, all of us, the family, looking up and praying, you know, hoping that he would be safe. And of course, Dad brought him down. But that was Urban.
My husband did
Well,
when he
thank
was
you for
3.
listening so
With his
well.
big brother.
Thank you.
Sorghum that they used to grow, the farmers used to grow there.
Yeah.
It was boiled and they put sugar in them and made syrup for their pancakes.
Oh, okay. Sorghum was used to make syrup for the pancakes.
Yeah, they raised it by corn.
Something like
I
that.
know, but I don't remember what it is.
This is a book that I wrote on our family, the John D. Germain family. So you kind of browse.
Cool. Do you know when your family came from Canada, did they come in a wagon? How, I mean, with a horse-drawn wagon, or how did they get
They
there?
came in various ways. And they came from Canada, because they were 8 children, plus the father and the mother. So I'm sure they didn't come the same way all the way. You know, there would be horse and buggy, and then there would be, I don't know, some other
Boat,
They came by boat, by the way.
Parkway and Stagecoach.
stagecoach.